I think it's really apropos that work by this composer was chosen to be played because Mussorgsky, like this year's Underwood lecturer, explored human emotions, feelings, and failings in a unique and distinctive manner. When Kim Mosley first arrived at Florissant Valley in 1975, he soon became known as the photography teacher with the unconventional, far-out style of presentation. Indeed, it has been written of Kim that if Woody Allen was a fugitive from justice, a la Abby Hoffman, he might turn up as Kim Mosley. Like Woody Allen, Kim was ahead of his time. His work appears in public collections from Chicago to Eastern Europe to Japan. He has exhibited in one-man and group shows locally and from Portland, Oregon to Richmond, Virginia. He has published articles and books, and he is regularly invited as a guest lecturer at schools, colleges, and conferences. What makes Kim such a sensitive and memorable teacher is that, as with many of our students, his path to success as a visual communicator was indirect, to say the least. Born into a family in which words and music were important, Kim suffered from a speech malady and could not carry a tune. Well into an English major, which was not his first major, at the University of Illinois, and with only a minor dabbling in photography up to that point, Kim found a teacher who nourished his interest in art, sculpture, painting, printmaking, and photography. I believe that it is Kim Mosley's early struggles, his loneliness in a world of achievers, his many fresh starts that have made him the nourishing mentor he has been in the last 2 decades of students here at Florissant Valley. Students who may have come to his classes because of a marginal interest in photography or a great interest in photography. With Kim as their guide, whether they become great photographers or photographers at all, they learn a new way of looking at and appreciating life and of recording and expressing their own unique celebrations of the world. Aside from being a photographer, painter, sculptor, printmaker, blacksmith, bread maker, father, husband, philosopher, and poet, Kim Mosley is an inquisitive man of boundless energy, amazing creativity, offbeat humor, eclectic interests, intensity softened by compassion, and a champion for the individual success of each student as a whole person. I present to you the 1996 David L. Underwood Memorial Lecturer, Kim Mosley.
Thank you, Sid. You kind of justified the new talk I did because I eliminated all the confessions that you told. So it's really apropos what you did. And thank you very much, Ivy and crew, for just a magnificent performance. It was, even though I was listening to it on a phonograph over and over and over again, being able to see you perform and see the expressions really made a difference. And I discovered things that I didn't hear. And thank you, Mrs. Underwood, for making this all possible. It's just really been an incredible time for me to be thinking about what to say. I edited and changed the introduction for this talk many times. I complained to Mary Seeger about it a few weeks ago. She said, "You could start all over." I told her no, that I'd spent too much time on it already. "Oh, come on," she prodded. "You changed your ideas constantly when we worked on the cancer project." It is now 2:53 a.m. I couldn't sleep. Tomorrow I'm supposed to give a lecture, and I worked on it since April, and supposedly finished it last weekend and put it up on the internet, and some people even read it and sent me some nice comments. That was my Underwood lecture. You can read it when you go back to your office. Here's what I did not say. Do you remember Marshall McLuhan, who told us that the medium is the message, or the massage, as his book was called? For me, that was one of the most profound statements of the 20th century. I know Herb disagrees. I'll tell you about that in a few weeks. McCullen told us that most of what we get from a given medium comes not out of the content, but from the medium itself. Film is hot, TV is cool, he said. 8x10 black and white photographs are the same. 17-syllable haikus are the same. Most of the carrier of the content is the form. Remember, repeat that. Most of the carrier of the content is the form. The problem with the lecture is that it says, open your mouth and I will share what I know. Let's go back over 2,000 years to an ancient Greek called Socrates. He used a new and different medium to teach, which became known in the 17th century as the Socratic method. He was scornful of the sophists who would give polished lectures about what they supposedly knew. He was more interested in examining knowledge through dialogue than he was in telling someone the truth. He was more interested in learning than in teaching. The Oracle of Delphi claimed that Socrates was the wisest man because he knew what he knew, which was nothing. The others thought they knew that which they did not know. Socrates spent the rest of his life walking through the streets and examining whomever he could engage in conversation. That was his medium. That was his massage. I'm unable to sleep because I'm so overwhelmed. My sister, who's here, she said it's because I'm manic, but it's not that. Because I am so overwhelmed by the challenge of giving part of myself to the wonderful people who are here today, and thank you for being here. I feel good about the paintings which are in the reception area and also with the stories which accompany them, which I shall soon share with you. I do not feel comfortable with the idea of a lecture, and here's why. I don't learn from lectures. Most people don't. Most people, that is, except for teachers. They form a unique group who learn pretty well from what they hear. We are finding out that students learn 20% of a lecture and 95% of what they teach. It is not quite right that we are getting paid and our students are paying. I don't know about you, but I've learned far more at Florissant Valley than I ever learned in school. Sometimes students will complain that I don't tell them more. Open my mouth, they say, and stick some food in. I refuse to do that. Here it is. There are some scribbled words on a scrap of paper in our kitchen, but I stole it. It says, I lived half my life before I realized it was a do-it-yourself project. In school, we spent a lot of time studying discoveries. We missed the point. If we look at the discoverers, as Daniel Borston did, we see that their process often relied on mucking around in unknown territory, in a swamp of sorts, following minuscule scents ignored by others. One of my teachers said he'd rather see a good scholar than a good student. Mucking around, finding out who you are and what you want to say and be are, for me, the essence of scholarship. I'm drawn to that word mucking because one of my photography heroes, Harry Callahan, used it often. He would go out shooting every morning, mucking around, as he would call it, and then come home, develop his film, eat lunch, and then print. For 10 years, after producing wonderful work for decades, he came up with nothing day by day, but he believed in the process, and finally some new work came. He thought of himself as dumb, almost as Socrates did. He approached photography as if it was an unknown area. He was not interested in what was supposedly so. He believed only in what he could discover for himself. As I read to you some of the wonderful things about David Underwood, you will not hear any comments about his ability to lecture. You will hear about his ability to listen, to be compassionate, to challenge, and to be a friend. As I find out about some of the previous Underwood lectures, I find these same attributes. I would like to propose we change the name of the David L. Underwood Memorial Lecture Award to the David L. Underwood Memorial Award, dropping the word lecture. Maybe in the future, others receiving the award will discover new and better forms for their presentation. The worst thing a photographer can do is to look through the viewfinder with a picture in his mind. What happens is that he learns not to see, but to match the pictures he has seen to what exists on the other side of the lens. He is not a discoverer, just a mimicker. He might even do it better than the photographers before him, but he is not alive to what might be happening right in front of his eyes, to that incredible event which never occurred before and may never occur again. What I will do now is show you some of the web pages which we have been developing at Florissant Valley over the last 10 months, starting with the new district homepage, to the campus page, to the Underwood pages, and finally to stories which supplement my paintings. I'm terribly excited about this medium and unable to sleep because it is such a sacrilege to present it in a lecture, as a lecture in a linear form. The web is about traveling. I hesitate to use the word surfing, but it is a good one. Surfers don't have a particular destination. They ride the waves. If I do anything here, it will be to show something of that potential. This is the district homepage, and it's not up yet, but it will be very soon. This is our campus page. You'll be able to scroll down here, and this is a place where we can put all programs which don't appear on the top half of the page. And if you go to the Center of Teaching and Learning, which on the present page you can also find under information, and go to awards, we're going to start listing here the different awards. We're thinking of some new awards also. And for example, with the Innovator of the Year, we could have all the innovators and what they innovated. And I think that will be interesting for people in terms of getting ideas for new things and to continue the recognition. This is a page about the Underwood Award. And this is information, thanks to Sid, that I was able to put together about David Underwood. I'd like to read a few quotes about him that were in the forum, March 20th, 1975. There are men too gentle to walk among wolves. David Underwood was one of those men. To represent, serve, and protect us, the college community, he walked among wolves and worse, and he did it smiling, puffing at the always present pipe, quoting Emerson and Thoreau. He was a quiet man of gentle wit and great humor. I see my position in all this as a court jester, he once said. In Shakespeare's sense, he was just that, always pointing to the truth in humorous ways, advising without dictating, leading to a place better for all, yet not seeming to be a leader. He was one of us, a student, a teacher, a custodian, a secretary. He touched us all in a short life. If it were not for Dean Underwood, the forum would not be here. He began the first North Star, the forum's predecessor, while the campus still was located in the old barracks. I just grabbed a guy to be editor, he said. It turned out he couldn't pass developmental English. He was a listener. His door was always open to anyone. People talked to him about their personal and professional lives. He listened and gave advice when it was requested, but mostly he listened, which many times was all that was needed. He was a family man, a private man who preferred long walks with his wife Annabelle and their children Dan and Kathy to movie houses and parties. How we shall all miss him. This is a table, we call it, of all the Underwood recipients. I'm not going to go through all of them. You can do that, but I'll show you a few. Myron Marty, the first one. Ron. Aldringhoff. We have many photos in our archives that don't have dates. We have others that don't quite match the year, but Gladys Thum and her sister. Some wonderful photographs by Ed Menges of Marvin Barnum. Lenora E. West. Charlie Jones left, Jim O'Grady, and Marilyn DeWitt. Bill Miller. Pete Kellums. Ken Smith. I think one of the few photos we have that was taken on the day, or I think Ken said, of his talk. Carol Edwards. Emily Liebman from 1972. I thought you would like that. Ken Boyer. Stan Carey. Carolyn. Carl Bruns. Jeanette. Ted Finkelstein. Sid. Jack Ballinger. Mary Seeger. This is a collage I did. I'm not sure if I used it at one time or another. And me. And I want to thank my wife, Linda. She's been so incredible through this process. I'm sure that I couldn't live with anyone writing an Underwood lecture. I read the back cover of pictures at an exhibition and found two movements of the symphony with which I could identify. One was the gnome with deformed legs, who was a nutcracker, and the other was about two Russian Jews, one rich and one poor. Both of my grandparents were Russian Jews, one rich and one poor. And I always thought of myself as somewhat deformed because of my speech problem. So I thought that it would be easy to do a painting about either of these. Almost as if Ivy had been given a script to make this more challenging, he described the movements with which he was arranging. He passed by both of the ones I had hoped he would do. I could have said, "Can't you do the gnome and the Russian Jews?" But I don't like doing that. I was overwhelmed at first with all his generosity to perform here today. And I believe that one of the gifts of life are its challenges. So I listened to the three versions of pictures of an exhibition over and over again, only to come up blank with a visual interpretation. I decided to just paint as I listened to the music. It's kind of like giving this talk where at 9:15 or whenever it started, I had to be up here. I knew that once I got one mark down, the next one would come. Kind of a strategy I use in my painting is if I get this part of a nose down on a blank canvas, then you need to do this, and then a mouth, and then a head, and then the rest. Sometimes we need to just do it, even if we don't have a plan. Our unconscious mind can often suggest solutions that our conscious mind can't fathom. When Chancellor Stevenson congratulated me on getting the Underwood Award, she asked me how my classes were going. How nice would it have been to say that I haven't lost a student and that they have all gone on to change the face of the earth. But I told her that they were not going well. I was experimenting with structures that would give students as many choices as possible, and I had probably gone overboard. The mature students were okay, the immature ones were getting lost. She was excited and encouraging by what I was trying and told me to write about it. On Ken Boyer's urging, I took the ISW workshop this summer. I thought that I would learn a vocabulary about teaching which I could use to refute all traditional processes and techniques. I discovered that the ideas I was trying were used by many. That was comforting. I also discovered that my colleagues were a tremendous feedback mechanism. William James wrote years ago in A Certain Blindness of Human Beings that someone passing us on the street knows us better than we know ourselves. Imagine what another teacher could tell you just with a few minutes of observation. I hope that when I return to teaching in the spring, that we can organize some visitations into each other's classrooms, not with the goal of evaluation, but with the goal of improvement. The subject of this painting is about the diversity of learning styles. In the ISW, we took a test to determine how we best learn. We found that 7 people had 7 completely different learning styles. We divided the room into 4 quadrants, and each of us stood somewhere in the room to represent how we learn. We were all over the map. Since I was not a good student, I know how it feels to be subjected to the wrong style of learning. One feels like a fine-threaded bolt being screwed into a coarse-threaded nut. They never come out the same. After the workshop and after taking a Student's Right to Succeed workshop, I looked at an old grade book and realized that I couldn't remember most of my former students. That seemed to me a major failing on my part. The teachers who meant so much to me were the ones who knew that I existed. Maybe students should get their money back if teachers don't remember their names. I'm not a news junkie. My parents read 3 newspapers daily and more on Sunday. Sometimes I have CNN on in my studio, but I forget to listen to it. I do keep up with some technology news, however. I remember looking at some computer magazines in the early 80s and feeling completely lost, even after taking Carol Clark's helpful computer literacy course. Eventually, the computer technology stuff started to soak in. I could start to pretend to understand Jim Cooper when he would explain things to me. I was waiting for one day when either the newspaper or TV news cut short with the statement, "Sorry, no more news today." Or else when they start inserting news of some personal significance, like Kim's new dog, Otto, learned to run around his studio with a playing card in his mouth. He was trying to make him into a magician's assistant. That's Otto left pointing at Otto right. He's a pointer of sorts. Newspapers will not be around for long. They deplete resources from trees to energy. They are clumsy to deliver and to read. They don't have enough of what you are interested in, and they always have too much of what you aren't. Worst of all, they have refused to accommodate people who are allergic to their smell. Now you can have your news personally edited and electronically delivered. You don't need information about some things. You might desperately need information about others, but the form will have to change. Unfortunately, so far electronic news has not been very successful. Here's Webster. I didn't know my sister was coming. She just surprised me last night that this was her dog. You'll know. I never knew why they would call a cigar Webster. My sister had a dog named Webster, which she tied to the door of the Humane Society when she moved out of town. And some years later, I visited a cabin where Webster wrote the dictionary, or was it Thorndike? I can't be sure. We think of the dictionary as a book, yet it is really a fabulous database of words, their derivations, pronunciations, and definitions. As we move to more and more electronic books, we'll have access to all the meanings and all the words and their meanings by just clicking on them. Cigars are another artifact that may leave us. They currently, however, are having a rebirth in popularity. And the can't go anywhere? I misspell words to both irritate my high school English teachers and for the double meanings which misspell can suggest. Smokers can't go anywhere, artists can't go anywhere, vegetarians can't go anywhere. The world opens its arms and its doors to non-smoking, meat-eating, non-artists, or maybe it's smoking vegetarian artists. I'm not sure. Webster is blue because of these and other changes in our society. His hands are held up as if he has given up. His feet have atrophied because he doesn't move with the times. Marc Chagall did a stained glass window at the Art Institute of Chicago with an incredible blue sky. I always thought of his skies as being a repose from the turmoil in Europe. He was a dreamer. Like Marc Chagall, my ancestors were Jews. Pork was a forbidden food, not in our household, but was not to be eaten according to Jewish law. I take special pleasure in honoring the pig, since he has had such a bad rap from the Jewish people. The pig is supposedly the most intelligent of all animals, except us, of course. Yet it is the butt of so many jokes and insults. I enjoy the fact that bacon is the most expensive meat per ounce of protein. The orange man is naked. Not naked in the sense of being without clothes, but naked the way one is when they expose themselves. Not an exposure like someone who flashes open a raincoat, but the exposure of someone who takes risks or even gives a talk like this. A gallery director some years ago asked how I aligned myself to the realists. I told him I see myself as a realist, which causes my sister, who was recently, this is the same sister who was here, who was recently licensed as a psychologist, to call me psychotic. She surprised me and appeared in St. Louis last night to verify her diagnosis. And then she added the manic, so I'm really in trouble. But there's some problem, I understand, in thinking that you're psychotic. Isn't that what you said, that it means you're not, or something? She's shaking her head. I try to clearly express my thoughts. I try not to make anything up, which is kind of fun because one of my best artist friends makes everything up. And so we each have our own territory. I realize that the visual shell which our eyes perceive does not tell the whole story. And I really got that from my mother background as a psychoanalytical social worker, whatever she was, and not being able to hear, so she wouldn't listen to what you would say, but she would kind of like look underneath. My challenge as an artist has been to interpret through my perceptions, my experiences, and my knowledge. Because each of us occupy a unique place on Earth, both in time and space, our interpretation of reality is also unique. There is a wonderful story about 20 photographers who each snapped the shutter of the same camera, fixed on a tripod, focused on the same mountain peak. Each picture comes out totally different. For me, the ultimate goal of an arts education is that each student finds his or her own voice. We admire artists like Marc Chagall because they envisioned reality in a new and meaningful way. I feel that each one of us is capable of this. Mary asked me a couple of years ago if I would work with her to portray her struggle with cancer and chemotherapy. At that time, I saw her as an amazing Pollyanna who was staring death in the face and laughing. It is a total paradox. How could a seemingly intelligent woman who faces issues very squarely be optimistic when all the odds were against her? I grew up in a household of two parents who had been through psychoanalysis. My mom was trained as a psychiatric social worker. I had heard Freudian explanations from the time I was born. It was their way of explaining human behavior. In my mind, I decided that Mary really knew she was dying, but was only able to enjoy herself because she was in denial. One day, she told me how she had walked in Forest Park as the leaves were starting to turn. She said she was able to see the park as if it would be the last time she would be able to experience a change in seasons. How could someone who was dying be having such a rich experience? In searching for the answer, I decided that we were all dying, and the only difference between Mary and me was that I was going to live longer than she. I excitedly presented her with this new theory. No, she said, she wasn't dying at all, she was living. And I could be terminated tomorrow by a garbage truck as I drive out of my driveway onto Parker Road. I spoke with Mary, I guess yesterday, and she wanted you to know that she's in good shape for her sabbatical. She's in Massachusetts in her cabin, and this weekend she's going to learn the Eskimo roll at a kayaking workshop. One of my first journeys with Mary during her chemotherapy was to the hairdresser to have her wig trimmed. I was feeling sad for her, having to endure one of the worst medical treatments and having to wear a wig, which normally would be the last thing she would do. How surprised I was to see her joy as she and the hairdresser carried on with laughter, jokes, and friendship. The painting occurred in a world without a ground plane in the sky and with a green cloud in the bottom left corner. On Earth, we are happy or sad depending on our perceived condition. Here was Mary living completely in the present, who, in spite of a bad roll of the dice, was happier than most of us would be if we had won the lottery. Pillar of Flaming Trumpets combined elements from an old catechism book with a photograph of Mary attending her prayer group sessions. I tried to give it a postmodern slant with the phrase at the bottom of the painting, Our Lady of the Miraculous Medal. I was not raised with any formal religious training. My parents were atheists, though as they get closer to their demise, they are slowly becoming agnostics. My two friends were religious. One was a devout Catholic, and the other being the son of a minister. I would spend Sundays waiting for them to come home from church, and then waiting for them to get out of their Sunday clothes so we could get back to playing. I was always curious about religion. How could we believe in things we couldn't see? A couple of years ago, I realized that all my life I've worshipped objects and people far beyond what their physical essence might dictate. I believed that what I really worshipped was the significance of these forms and the way these forms function as equivalences or metaphors to larger thoughts. This had become my religion. Now, I apologize that this, is not all about happy things, but I've discovered that life has a great variety. Toby is our new Airedale puppy. He was picked out of the last of 3 pups of a litter of 9. I liked he because he chased a cat away from his food. I don't like cats because they know everything. Toby was born in October. I call he a her most of the time because our other dog, who deserves a story, is a her. I called our other dog, Joba, a he for a long time because my dog before that, Blackbeard, was a he, though he didn't know what to do with hers. When he's 5 months, he'll become a her, which will just about be the time that I'll start calling her he. How about it? Funny Toby story today. He got itted. Anyway, I called to see how it was, and the secretary at the animal hospital said, "Oh," and then there was a long silence. I heard someone walking around and thought that she had gone to get the doc to explain the worst to me. Finally, she got back on the phone and said, "Oh, she's fine, still asleep, but fine." Now it's at home, sleeping. 7/24/96, sad story. Today, Toby's this life ended. He had a terrible case of hip dysplasia and had trouble at 9 months getting up. Linda believes that he had completed this stage of his reincarnation in record time. We might get another Airedale in the middle of September. Maybe it will even be partly Toby. I could have called this Dick and Jane many years later. I'm fascinated by these basic elements of the good life as proposed by so many of us for the last century. The only thing missing is an apple pie Stan the man holds the baseball. He's grown a little old, though, and he's having trouble reading the signature on it. The dog is old and tired as well. His eyes are partially closed, and he looks like he could use a good run, or maybe it is too late. The oak trees are covered with Spanish moss. The dog and the man have similar coloration, and both are looking down and to the left. For me, it becomes a picture about time passing. The house appears to be a southern mansion with an American flag attached to the second-story porch. It appears to be late in the day with the shadows of the tree cast upon the house. Stan the man, the dog, the tree, and the day are all tired. Is this a story we don't tell our kids? This is a funny one. I've been into pigs since 1968 when Linda's roommate Sandy had a beautiful long-haired guinea pig named Hieronymus. On the coldest day of the decade, Sandy called me up in the middle of the night and asked if I would come over and bring some tools. She was hysterical and hard to understand, but finally I was able to figure out that Hieronymus had gotten stuck in her dormitory desk. I threw some tools into an old doctor's satchel that I'd gotten from one of my favorite uncles, and my dog and I went out in the blizzard to save the pig. This was before college students had cars. Since they lived in a dormitory and it was a long time ago, we were not allowed in, so we had to hand the tools through the window and then went back to my apartment to sleep. The next day I had a full day of drawing classes. Even though there was a model, I was driven to draw everything in the room and in my imagination except for the model. Anyway, I started imagining Hieronymus listening to the destruction of his new home. Imagine sitting in your living room as a bulldozer is coming down the hallway. During the breaks, I would call Sandy and ask about the pig. One time she would report, "He's dead. I can see him, but he's not moving." So I would go back to the classroom and do a poor Hieronymus, he's dead drawing. The next hour I would call, I've shortened this whole story. The next hour I would call and say, she would say, "He's alive, he's moved." It would be then a lucky Hieronymus, he's alive drawing. Then finally she got him out and took him to the University of Illinois Small Animal Clinic. They found him in good shape and ready for a long life. Little did they know that he would experience the turn of the century in my artwork. Obviously, what an artist or anyone intends to say and what is heard are different things. When they are not the same, either the artist is a poor communicator, speaks a different language, unconsciously wants to say what is really being heard, or the reader-viewer needs a new pair of glasses. That's why I have everyone in my classes respond independently in writing to everyone else's work. I want the students to get used to the fact that art is communication and that its success is unknown unless a variety of independent responses are collected. I don't think of myself as a very important critic for my students. I'm either too critical or too generous. I'm too conscious of what might be good for them or harmful. So I try to facilitate the students in critiquing each other. Those students who trust me rather than their classmates are usually in trouble. The young woman in this picture, whose mother is dean of a prominent law school, is going to a prominent art institute in the fall where she will be at home. I was especially interested in the double piercing of her tongue, as my Flo Valley students have only one each. That's one piercing and one tongue. I grew up believing that any woman who wore makeup was suspect. That was strange because my mother used lipstick and powder, and my grandmother did too, but anyone younger was supposed to have no secrets. We had great debates with my daughter when she wanted to pierce her ears. As she is the most verbal in the family, she won that and all other arguments. The other day, she asked if she could have a tattoo. You never know if kids say these things to see what kind of inheritance they are not going to get, or if they are seriously contemplating forever marking their bodies. Then she added, well, I could have a tattoo of one of your faces, then I would never forget you. I'd imagined me getting one of those tattoos, though I photographed a tattoo shop in Houston some years ago and didn't want to go near one again. I told her that tattoos are forever. She's waiting for this moment I'm going to show you with her boyfriend, who she doesn't know who it is. That's John, Melissa. That wasn't my brilliant philosophy either. It came from that Houston tattoo shop where the tattooist was referring to tattooing the name of one's girlfriend. I was asking about that. Well, what do you do if, you know? Then we moved to a discussion of piercing. Could she pierce this or that? Well, I said, that would be a lot better than tattooing. My daughter then said, well, now I have to go. Bye. I aged quite a bit that afternoon. My 19-year-old daughter, Melissa, said to her cousin, who is 30, any of you remember that when you were 30? Something is wrong with this family. How did I get you as a cousin when you are so old? And so we have a lesson in relativity. Here I am ready to turn 50, laying down in a cell at the LA City Jail after a long day at looking at art in the Mecca of the West. Artists had transformed one floor of the jail into a series of installations, a word used to justify any artistic effort which is not hanging on a wall or sitting on a sculpture stand. 40 was a hard one. From 25 to 31, I focused on being an artist and my first teaching jobs. From 31 to 40, I got involved in raising two wonderful kids as well as being an artist and teacher. I'm not prepared yet for not remaining 25, and I refuse to describe myself as middle-aged. It is even a hard word to say. My daughter thought that it was terrible what I first wrote about this picture. She said that I was giving divorce a bad rap, that really isn't divorce just a solution to a bad relationship. I've always had trouble getting rid of anything. My mother says that she would have to hide things from me because otherwise I wouldn't do anything else. I'm sure that if I had had a computer back then, my mom would have put the power cord under lock and key. I didn't initially notice the distance between Adam and Eve when I took the pictures. I'm in a lot of trouble with this picture because I have another sister who has a son named Adam, and now they don't think I know their names, but I didn't know what to do. Sometimes it seems that pictures change as circumstances changed. Have you noticed that, looking through a drawer of pictures and you see something you never saw at the time as you get to know the person better? The little elves are at work at all those forgotten photographs. I gave Eve the crucifix because of her troubles and because she is a Christian. This was a mixed marriage of sorts, which sometimes seems to have the odds working against working out, have some odds against working out. The disapproval of elders is another issue for the work. The Big Brother is Watching is not a fiction of 1984. It has been there from the beginning of time. In this case, Big Brother is a grandmother who often we feel is watching over us with a critical eyes, even if she really is just there to support. I first knew Cheryl when she was married to someone else. I made a picture of her and her first hubby, which they both liked. Unfortunately, when they got unmarried, the picture was something they both wanted. I think they might have split it up with the marriage, though I can't remember for sure. Or maybe they now have joint custody. Anyway, when I would see Cheryl and Alan, Cheryl would ask for a retake. Here it is. My dad is one of those lawyers who invalidates all the bad lawyer jokes. And if you want to read them, just type lawyer jokes on any of the search engines. Hundreds of them. He has a number of college degrees, each under a different name. Immigrants who were adopted a stepfather were often in this situation. He can speak a number of languages and can pretend to speak many more. His Chinese is impeccable unless you happen to be from the same province, which unfortunately is not the case for anyone in China. Why the pink thumbtacks? I do give him a hard time. He has always wanted me to get the sex and religion out of my art. It probably stayed in because of him. He was going to be a doctor, but he couldn't stand the sight of blood. He's totally unmechanical, probably by choice, which was a great gift to me because I was allowed to fix things from the age of 5. There are 5 in the family, my mom on the left, who turned out to be the big cheese, and me and my 2 sisters. Since my mom had all the training as a psychiatric social worker, she figured that she and only she could raise the kids. She wasn't very trusting that anyone else could do the job, but Dad tried from time to time, only to be corrected. Every year, he plays a larger and larger role in our lives. He's reached his peak now at 82. He still plays tennis and walks miles every day with Mom. He daily gives advice to all his children and grandchildren. He even helps out our friends and students, usually with the same advice: see a lawyer. You know, that's probably, this pretty good advice when you're in trouble. And people wait too late, he always tells that story. He's had a wonderful retirement, writing some books, enjoying the company of his wife of now almost 60 years, and researching various legal issues. As I read the very moving statements about David Underwood, I'm reminded of my father. They both were incredibly gentle people, admired by everyone. This man was at a convention sitting in a hotel lobby. His green pants make him look like an alien. He has that dumb ID tag which we all wear at conventions. His eyes appear closed to suggest that he was looking inward. He is thinking about his childhood and all the children he used to know. The kids are brown to indicate that this is something in the distant past. He is an adult of sort, but has a very young face. His gigantic hand is blurred and held in such a way as to indicate that he doesn't know quite how to use it. The figure made out of the kids is balancing the head of an older man on his feet. And there on the left, there I am on the left with an orange face, stepping on a milking stool behind the conventional convention man who reminds me how I often feel at conventions. This is Otto wondering who threw the brown paint. No, I do not sit down and figure this out before I do it. I take it one step at a time. I find out more about myself as I make pictures than I express what I already know. First, I did a collage of the kids. Then I saw the man was looking at something and not seeing anything. Between serendipity and my guardian angel and the phone ringing, the Beatles on my phonograph, the news on my TV, Otto bumping my arm because it is time to take a walk, between all of that, I'm able to play second fiddle to the creation of these objects. I try hard to keep the works from being premeditated. The conscious mind and its predictable thoughts are not as interesting or as telling as our dreams. In an earlier version, you'll read some disclaimers that whatever I do is not at all what other artists do. We all do things differently, just like scientists all do things differently. This is the Mosley family. I have to confess that initially I was not enthusiastic about having kids. I was not feeling a great urge to procreate. Life was relatively fulfilling, and I was very involved in teaching and making art. Linda, being the nurturing being that she is, really wanted to have kids, so it originally was her thing. My first real memory of my son, our firstborn, was when he walked 9 steps. I was a little more aware of my daughter from the start. I remember her in an incubator of sorts in the hospital, and then at home as a fragile petite baby. Now I usually can't imagine life without either of the kids or Linda. They are all giving me so much daily, except a few days ago. My daughter Melissa insisted we get a CD trivia game. I think it was a ploy to ruin my self-esteem. She was flying around answering her questions and mine, and I sat there dumbfounded, dazed, stupid, gone. I was glad to hear the next day that her boyfriend was no better than I and would never play with her again either. I made the mistake with my son Josh of constantly tricking him. I would make up stories about how I'd gotten a free motorcycle and how it was bigger than a car and faster than an airplane and how it would fly and how it would fold up in your pocket and you could ride on it. Then we'd sit on some log in the backyard and I would look in my pocket and tell him I must have lost the key. Well, that was stupid. Never do that to a kid. He has paid me back over and over and over. Now, if we had more time, I'd go all semester over, many times. He'd call and tell me, he already did this the other day, he called and said that he wanted to rent a van because he was moving about 100 feet and that he didn't feel like carrying anything. And it was only $100 and I didn't mind, did I? He's good, I fall for it every time. In spite of Melissa's request to get a tattoo or Josh's desire to walk across Spain, I've kept a little of my brown hair. The rest has either turned gray or fallen off. Now Linda and I have gone to collecting dogs, and that is another story. One of our dogs came to us passive and well-behaved. We thought we couldn't do a lot of damage until we taught her to bark, telling ourselves that it was reciting poetry. That was a big mistake. Our new dog, the German Shorthair Pointer, is not passive. I wake up every morning with my body twisted in 100 directions and my hands aching from auto jerking at the leash. Today I'm going to get one of those spike collars, then we're going to get a digital electric fence, then I'm going to tie the two dogs together and watch them wear each other out. Margaret Mead used to speak about the importance of grandparents to the family. Our kids have been fortunate to have two sets who have been there for them all their lives. And Del and Dorothy Bergen are here, and I'm really glad they're here. Linda's parents, Del and Dorothy, who were so kind to come today, have given us continual support throughout our lives. For me, Del has taken the place of a grandfather who I used to spend wonderful summers with in Oregon, a little town which I will be photographing over Labor Day. My grandpa and I would muck around with tools, cutting wood, fishing, and all those good things. The neatest thing, and I want to see if they're still there, is we knew this special rock near the ocean that had kelp worms, and these are real weird worms that have thousands of legs on the bottom, and they were great bait, he thought, for fishing. We never caught anything, which was good, so the fish are still out there. In much the same way, Del and I have engaged in numerous building projects, including adding an addition to our house, building a number of different studios for us as we moved around. But the greatest gift has not been the lending hand which Del and Dorothy have given up so unselfishly. It has been a real sense of family, everything from being there when they're needed to sometimes not being there when they're not needed. They have received many offers from our friends who would like to adopt them as in-laws. My last piece. My fifth grade teacher is now 102. She is one of the most wonderful people I know. Last time I went to visit her, she had cooled glasses in the icebox so that they would be cold for our drinks. I showed her a pile of my photographs. She was fascinated by the staples and touched every one of them all over. I wouldn't let anyone else do that, even myself. But who can say no to their fifth grade teacher? She was really tough back then. I asked her a few years later about that, and she said that it was pretend. Otherwise, how could she keep us all in line? How I wish I had known what a pushover she was. I'm amazed at the speed at which life progresses. It seems as if it was just yesterday when, in 1975, we left Dallas to come to St. Louis. My daughter wasn't even a thought. My son could barely reach the trailer hitch behind our car, and Linda was pit-firing pre-Columbian pots. Now my daughter is negotiating for a higher salary. My son is taller than I and is reaching all kinds of things which I have trouble even imagining, and Linda is always busy transforming her many landscapes with teaching, gardening, and pottery. As I ponder these pictures and write about them, it seems that for me, it is these soft places in my heart that give life substance. Thank you so much for being here.